Under the fluorescent lights of the Iranian Foreign Ministry's briefing hall, cameras hum softly and reporters lean forward, pens poised. It is a crisp November morning in Tehran, and at the podium stands Esmaeil Baqaei, the ministry's spokesman, calm, composed, and visibly dismissive of the latest accusation from Washington. The United States has claimed that Iran plotted to assassinate the Israeli ambassador in Mexico, but Baqaei's tone and his expression tell another story, one of disdain and disbelief. He begins his statement with a deliberate pause, scanning the room before speaking. "We found this claim so ridiculous and absurd," he says, his voice steady, "that we didn't even think it required a spokesperson's statement. As our embassy stated, this was a baseless and truly ridiculous allegation." The words echo sharply through the hall, an emphatic rejection of what Tehran calls another Western fabrication designed to vilify the Islamic Republic. Across the front row, journalists type rapidly as Baqaei continues. Behind the rows of reporters, the Iranian flag and the ministry's blue and gold emblem form the backdrop, symbols of sovereignty and defiance that have long defined Iran's diplomatic stage. The message is clear: Tehran will not allow this narrative to stand uncontested. The accusation from Washington had surfaced just days earlier, carried through intelligence leaks and quickly amplified by Western outlets. US officials alleged that Iranian operatives had conspired to kill the Israeli ambassador to Mexico, claiming the plot was foiled through coordination with regional partners. But for Iran, this was just the latest chapter in what it describes as a campaign of psychological warfare, a bid to discredit it internationally at a time when tensions with Israel and the US are already dangerously high. Baqaei's remarks come amid a wave of geopolitical strain. Only a month earlier, Iran and Russia had expanded their cooperation on nuclear energy, prompting alarm in Western capitals. The United States has been working to rally allies in Europe and Latin America to counter Iran's regional influence, particularly in places where Tehran has quietly expanded its diplomatic and intelligence footprint. Mexico, in that context, has become an unexpected focal point on a crossroads of North American politics and Middle Eastern intrigue. Inside the press hall, Baqaei does not raise his voice. His tone is one of controlled irritation, the kind that comes from years of dealing with what Iranian officials often call manufactured crises. He insists that such allegations are part of a broader strategy, one that uses fear and misinformation to justify sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and military posturing. Every time Iran moves forward with diplomacy or cooperation, he says, there are forces that try to sabotage the atmosphere with false accusations. As he speaks, the camera cuts to a row of journalists scribbling notes, some exchanging skeptical glances. Behind them, a soft murmur fills the room, a mix of whispered translations and quiet analysis. For foreign correspondents, this is familiar ground. Iran's denials are categorical, but Washington's claims have their own rhythm, often citing unnamed intelligence officials and shadowy plots traced to the Quds Force or affiliated operatives abroad. The story, like so many before it, sits at the intersection of espionage, politics, and perception. To the United States, Iran's global network remains a persistent threat, one that stretches from Beirut to Caracas, from Damascus to Mexico City. To Iran, those same accusations are the product of what it calls Western hypocrisy, an attempt to criminalize its diplomacy while ignoring Israel's covert operations against Iranian scientists, officials, and infrastructure. The voiceover shifts to context, an analytical tone layered over the visuals of Tehran's foreign ministry building, its marble walls gleaming under the morning light. The narrator explains that the accusation emerged from a classified intelligence report shared among US agencies and later confirmed by senior officials to several media outlets. According to those reports, the alleged plot was tied to individuals with links to Iran's security apparatus. However, no evidence was made public, and Mexican authorities have issued no statement confirming such a threat. This silence, the narrator notes, is crucial. It underscores how accusations of this nature often play out, public enough to stir headlines, yet vague enough to leave room for diplomatic maneuvering. Tehran's response, though, is calculated to convey both outrage and indifference. Outrage at what it sees as slander, indifference toward the supposed credibility of the claim. Back at the podium, Baqaei continues to field questions. A journalist asks whether Iran plans to summon the Swiss ambassador, who represents US interests in Tehran, to issue a formal protest. The spokesman smiles briefly, sidestepping direct confrontation. When a claim is this absurd, he says, We prefer not to dignify it with diplomatic formalities. His tone carries a faint note of sarcasm, a familiar feature of Iranian briefings when addressing Western intelligence narratives. The voiceover transitions to commentary. Analysts say Baqaei's language mirrors a broader diplomatic strategy: project confidence, dismiss accusations as propaganda, and pivot the conversation toward double standards. In Tehran's view, Israel's covert actions, including the assassination of Iranian scientists and cyber attacks on nuclear facilities, are routinely overlooked, while Iran is accused of plots that often remain unsubstantiated. For much of the past decade, this pattern has defined Iran's fraught relationship with both Washington and Tel Aviv. Accusations emerge, denials follow, and the geopolitical chessboard shifts only slightly before the next controversy erupts. Yet this time, the choice of Mexico as the alleged target location adds a new layer of intrigue, suggesting that the rivalry between Iran and Israel may be expanding into new regions far from their traditional battlegrounds. The camera pans across Tehran's skyline, capturing the city's mix of modernity and tradition, highways filled with traffic, domes glinting in the sunlight, and billboards adorned with revolutionary slogans. The narrator explains that Iran has spent years cultivating relations with Latin American nations, including Venezuela, Bolivia, and Nicaragua, a strategy aimed at breaking Western isolation and finding new markets amid sanctions. US officials have long warned that such ties could provide Iran with logistical networks outside the Middle East. Still, the evidence for this particular plot remains elusive. No suspects have been named, no details released, and no corroboration provided by Mexican authorities. In this vacuum, Tehran's dismissal gains rhetorical power. To many Iranians, it reinforces the perception that their nation is unfairly targeted, its name dragged into controversies that lack substance. Inside Iran, state media echoes Baqaei's sentiment, calling the allegation a fabricated provocation. Headlines describe it as a diversion from US domestic struggles and Israeli political turmoil. Analysts on Iranian television argue that the claim serves as a distraction, a way to shift attention from Israel's internal crises and from the humanitarian situation in Gaza, where tensions continue to simmer following the fragile ceasefire. The voiceover deepens its tone, connecting the dots between the regional and the global. Iran's Foreign Ministry, it explains, sees these accusations as part of a coordinated campaign, with Israel facing mounting diplomatic pressure and Washington under scrutiny for its Middle East policy. Tehran believes both governments have incentives to shift the narrative, to cast Iran once again as the global villain. As Baqaei's press conference continues, his body language reveals the practiced ease of a diplomat accustomed to controversy. He gestures calmly, alternating between Farsi and brief English phrases for clarity. At one point, he looks directly into the cameras and says, "We have seen such claims before, and we will see them again." They are political tools, not facts. His remark draws quiet nods from several correspondents. The narrator cuts in again, offering broader context. Over the past year, Iran has faced a resurgence of Western accusations, from alleged drone supplies to Russia in Ukraine to cyber operations targeting infrastructure in Europe. Yet despite these claims, Iran has maintained active diplomatic outreach, hosting delegations from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The goal, Tehran insists, is to demonstrate that it remains a legitimate and influential actor on the world stage, not the isolated pariah portrayed in Western narratives. Meanwhile, in Washington, officials continue to insist that the threat was real. Anonymous sources quoted in major newspapers describe a credible intelligence assessment linking the alleged assassination attempt to Iranian actors. But with no public evidence, the debate remains stuck in the grey zone between espionage and politics, a familiar no man's land where deniability and suspicion coexist. As the press conference wraps up, Baqaei collects his notes and steps away from the podium. The room hums with the low murmur of journalists filing their first reports. For Iran, the statement is done, the message delivered. For the international press, however, the story is just beginning to ripple outward, its details uncertain, its implications far-reaching. The voiceover continues, weaving through the aftermath. Outside the ministry gates, Tehran's streets buzz with routine life. Vendors calling out prices, cars honking, pedestrians crossing busy intersections. To most Iranians, this controversy feels distant. another foreign drama in a long list of diplomatic confrontations. Yet to the diplomats inside the marble building, every accusation matters. Every word becomes a data point in the long struggle over how Iran is perceived by the world. In the following days, Iran's statement is picked up by international media, though the tone varies sharply. Western outlets frame it as a categorical denial, while Iranian papers call it mocking defiance. The differences underscore how narrative wars shape modern diplomacy, each side amplifying its own truth, each headline reinforcing its worldview. The narrator's voice lowers slightly, drawing attention to the broader stakes. Accusations of assassination plots are not mere headlines. They can have real consequences. Such claims often justify new sanctions, heighten tensions, or derail quiet negotiations behind the scenes. In 2022, for instance, a similar claim about an Iranian plot to target a US diplomat led to additional sanctions and stalled back-channel talks. For Tehran, therefore, denying these allegations swiftly and forcefully is not just about reputation, it's about preventing escalation. Baqaei's closing words from the conference are replayed as the video nears its end. Iran remains committed to diplomacy, dialogue and peace, but we will not tolerate baseless accusations. His tone is calm but firm. The sentence lingers, serving as both defense and warning. As the camera fades to black, the narrator concludes, "In the theatre of global politics, accusations and denials have become instruments of strategy, weapons in a war of narratives. Between Tehran and Washington, truth is often less important than timing, and perception can shape policy more powerfully than proof. For now, Iran calls the US claim absurd. But in the shadows where intelligence and diplomacy meet, the story is far from over." That closing line captures the enduring ambiguity, a sense that behind every press statement, every denial and every accusation, another unseen game continues. A game in which Tehran, Washington and Tel Aviv each play their part, each crafting the narrative that serves their national purpose best.
اما اینکه چرا این کشورها به خاطر اینکه این کشورها مدعی حقوق بشر هستند، ادعای حقوق بشری اونها صرفاً یک ادعای منافقانه به مدت که نقش اصلی رو داشت. ما در اجلاس یونسکو به ما گفته شده که فعالیت‌های سفارت از آمریکا برای ما و برای جامعه بین‌المللی مهم هست. راجع به این که ما بتوانیم
We found this claim so ridiculous and absurd that we didn't even think it required a spokesperson's statement. As our embassy stated, this was a baseless and truly ridiculous allegation.